Okay. Okay, I got it.
Yeah, it's 10 o'clock.
Good morning, everyone. This week's Parsha Chukat raises a fundamental issue. And basically, we can state that the world is not understandable to us. In spite of all of our efforts for rational thought and for explanation of everything that occurs, at the end of the day, more is mysterious than understood. More is hidden than is revealed. And even though we like to plan our lives, so to speak, on the basis of rational thought and of logical predictions, life mocks us. The unexpected always happens. And what we thought was a certainty ends up being just an illusion. So we see this in this week's Parsha clearly in a number of instances. And this leads to the discussion of the Mefarshim regarding the idea of rational understanding of mitzvot, of the commandments, and to questions of faith. So the Torah Parsha begins, Zot Chukat HaTorah. This is the ultimate chok, the ultimate mitzvah for which there is no rational explanation. Shlomo HaMelech said, Echkomo, I thought I would be wise. I thought I would be able to figure it out. And I see that it's too far from me. I cannot reach it. And that's this mitzvah of Torah Adumah, the red heifer, the red cow, that is completely mysterious. It's matame tahorim, it's matayr tmeim. The same ashes make the one who is pure impure, and make the one who is impure pure. So obviously the ashes don't have any quality to them. It's not the ashes that make you pure or that make you impure. So what is it? And then we have such wondrous detail regarding the Torah Adumah. You have to have a red cow, so we have to define what red means. Because if you take a look at a red rose, there are 100 shades of red in that one red. So how red is red? And they cannot have two black hairs, even if the whole epidermis, the skin is all red. Where do you find such a cow? And already the Gemara says that at the time in the Second Temple, was very rare to find such an animal. And that such an animal fetched an enormously great price because of the fact that it's so rare. Chazal use as an example of Kibbud Av Ha'ein, this non-Jewish person that was making a great business deal and he needed the keys to the lockbox, and his father was sleeping and the key was under the pillow, and there was a great deal of money involved, and he did not want to wake his father because that would be a violation of Kibbud Av Ha'ein. And the rabbis say he was repaid because later on in his herd of cows, a red cow was born that met all the requirements of the halacha, and he was paid a great deal of money for it, so that the Lord gave him, so to speak, his reward here. What is this thing with the red cow? So again, the Torah itself tells you in the onset, Zos Chukat HaTorah. I want to tell you something that you're never going to understand. Now, the question is, should we attempt to understand things? So there's discussion in all the Mefarshim regarding Tamei HaMitzvot, whether or not we should try and give a rational explanation to the commandments of the Torah. So there are certain commandments that lend themselves easily to rational explanations. Not to steal, not to murder, to rest one day a week. We're able, so to speak, to justify a mitzvah, if I can use that word, which I just did. But there are mitzvot that not just the Porah Aduma. So what do we do with those? So the extreme, there have always been two extremes on this issue, because if you hold the extreme, it becomes easy. You're able to deal with it. So one extreme is that we don't understand any mitzvah, and that we only do it because God told us to do it. And God has his purposes to which we are not privy, and we don't know, and we don't have to know. Just do it. Now, there are many things in life that resemble that. You do not have to understand the physical properties of electricity in order to turn on the light. If a person says, well, I'm not going to hit the switch until I understand what electricity is and how it works and what the connection is and why, if they're pumping coal in the Reading plant in Chadera, what has that got to do with me? We don't ask that question. We just push the button. So there's a famous story from the Kotzker that a Jew came to him and he said, I have to blow the shofar this year in Shul on Rosh Hashanah. And explain to me what lies behind this mitzvah of blowing the shofar. What kavanah should I have? What should be my thoughts, my intent when I blow the shofar? Now, the Kotzker never took prisoners, and he didn't like to waste time. So he said, bring me a mouser. Bring me with a prayer book for Rosh Hashanah. Now, at the bottom of the page was printed the Hebrew letters Nun Bet. which was transformed from nota bene that the printers used to put on the bottom of the page, either to indicate footnotes or to indicate how the pagination should work. So he says, you see, it says nun bet. You know what that means? So the man said, no, Rebbe, I don't know what it means. He said, it means nar blows. You fool, just blow the shofar. Stop worrying about the great thoughts that have to be, just blow it correctly. That's all, that's your job. So that's one extreme. On the other hand, you have the Rambam, who's probably the head of the rationalists, though in the Tkufas Agonim, there were those already that preceded him, and in our time there are those that come after him, that say, no, we have to understand whatever we can understand. When we hit the brick wall, so then we'll stop. Then we'll blow. But we can understand why to blow. The Rambam says to wake up from our sleep. It's a call to action. It's a cry of, it's the siren regarding danger. That's why we blow the shofar. And the same thing is true of hundreds of mitzvot. We can understand and we can explain. So those are two extremes, how to deal with mitzvot. Most Mefarshim find themselves somewhere in the middle. That it's true that certain mitzvahs have rationality to them. They have logic. We can appreciate why it should be a mitzvah. But that even when we understand there is something else involved, and the something else involved exists in spheres that are not always understandable or visible to us. Well, for instance, when Kabbalah came into the Jewish world, especially the Zohar, in the Middle Ages, the Zohar came in the 15th century, but the Ramban was a Kabbalist already in the 12th century, 13th century. When that came in, so that opened the whole area a different viewpoint. That there's, so to speak, a different world, and there are different forces in the world that are influenced by our mitzvot. And those forces in the world bear upon our lifestyle and upon our world, but we're unaware of them. And we're unaware of how they work. Now, we know, for instance, in our time, so we just, thank God, we're out of the COVID-19 pandemic. But can you imagine, so that's because we know, or we think we know, pandemics, viruses, communicable diseases, infections. But if we were living in the 16th century, when there would be such a pandemic, can you imagine what the world would be like? Then it would be witchcraft. Then it would be somebody poisoned the wells, which is what happened with the Black Death and the bubonic plague in Europe in the 14th century. A third of Europe was wiped out, and no one knew why. and no one understood what the cause was. So if you're living in the 14th century, it's irrational. It's beyond our ability to know. The same thing would happen, God forbid, in the 21st century. We'd know exactly what to do, and we would know exactly how it happened. So here we have also the concept that the Mefarshim discuss regarding miracles. One generation's miracle is another generation's science. You have, if you ever read Mark Twain's book, A Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court, which is a very, very funny but true and accurate book about people. But the premise of the book is that this Connecticut Yankee from the 1800s, who's already knows a lot of science and understands a lot of things, the end of the 19th century, they already had electricity, and the telephone was invented. So now he finds himself somehow transformed and thrust into King Arthur's court in 9th century England. And in 9th century England, that nobody knows about gunpowder, nobody knows about anything yet, he is able to produce all these miracles because he has 19th century science in 9th century England. And naturally his competitor is Merlin the magician, and he out-Merlins Merlin because he has the advantage of knowing the science of the 19th century. So what was a miracle in the 9th century, completely not understood in natural terms, it becomes nature in the 19th century, completely understood. It's not miraculous. So you could say, and it's very easily said, that electricity is a miracle, the fact that you press a button and the light goes on. But because to us it is so natural, and we think we understand why it happens, it's not a miracle anymore. And therefore, how do we understand the miracles that appear in the Torah and in Tanakh? So we have an example of that in this week's Parsha as well. The Jewish people need water. You're in the middle of a parched desert. So water had been supplied by the well of Miriam. Miriam passes away in this week's Parsha. So there is no her well, no. So her well was a miracle, right? They have a well, a traveling well, traveling source of water, and now that is gone. Just a side note, that the Jewish people sing a song this week about the well. The great miracle that God granted to Israel, that they have a well of water. It's interesting, they sang the song when the well was no longer there. While the well was there, while Miriam was alive, there were those songs. That's a lesson in life. We usually only appreciate things when they're not there anymore. We appreciate people when they are no longer here. While they're here, it's taken for granted that it's going to be this way. It's taken for granted that there'll be a well because there was a well yesterday. Why shouldn't there be one today? It's only when the well, so to speak, is no longer there. Oz Yashir Yisrael Es Hashira Azos. Then did the Jewish people sing. Then did they say, wow, what a miracle we had. For 40 years, we had water in the middle of the desert. So now they need water. They have water in the desert, requires a miracle. There's this rock. The Rebbe Shalom Kaviyachol, God tells Moshe to speak to the rock. And by speaking to the rock, water will flow. And you have this great miracle in the desert that you have water, and you're talking about water for 3 million people. You're not talking about, a bottle of Coke. Enormous amounts of water. And there are cattle. And water is the most necessary thing in life. For whatever reason, and that's a different topic worthy of discussion in this week's Parsha, but for whatever reason, Moshe does not speak. Moshe does not do exactly what he is commanded. Moshe remembers that there was a similar incident earlier in the narrative of the Jewish people in the desert, and he needed water, and he therefore then smote the rock, he hit it with his staff. So now he repeats that miracle. He strikes the rock with his staff. At the beginning, there's only a trickle. He hits it again, and finally a torrent of water erupts. And there's enough water for everybody. So that's a pretty good miracle. The Rebbe Shalom says to Moshe, no, Yan le'amanten bi l'hagdisheni. You didn't believe in me. You hit the rock instead of speaking to the rock. And therefore you're not going to Eretz Yisrael. Now Moshe's ambition in life, the only reward that he wants for all of his efforts on behalf of the Jewish people is that he should be allowed to enter Eretz Yisrael. And the Lord, so to speak, closes the door on him. You're not going. And we'll read later in Chumash Dvarim, in the Parsha of Et Hanan, Moshe, he puts up 900 some prayers to come to Eretz Yisrael. And the Rebbe Shalom says, Al Tosef Daber Elai Od Badover Hazeh. It's enough, Moshe. That's it. Don't talk to me again about it. Well, to us, this is completely irrational. First of all, what's the difference if he talks to the rock or he hits the rock? Why is one more of a Kiddush Hashem than the other? Giving water to 3 million people in the desert is an impressive miracle, no matter how much it's done, how it was done. And it seems that the punishment doesn't fit the crime. Because of that, you don't go to Eretz Yisrael? So it's irrational to us. We don't understand what happened here. But that itself is the lesson of the Parsha of Chukas. It's like the mitzvah of the Torah Aduma. We have no explanation for it. The Mefarshim say that speaking to the rock was, so to speak, an old miracle. And an old miracle is not a miracle anymore. We're accustomed to it. So just like every day the man fell and they had bread to eat, and that happened for 40 years. So since it happened every day, it's not, it's not miraculous any longer. It's regular. Things that are regular are regular. Miracles become everyday occurrences. And everyday occurrences no longer border on the miraculous. Our existence now in Eretz Yisrael for the last almost 75 years is an ongoing miracle day by day. But because of the fact that 75 years, so it's not such a miracle anymore. It's irregular. And that's how it's treated. That's how people look at it. There's no longer, I don't know what word to use, but there's no longer the excitement that such a miracle deserves. Because it's natural. It's happened before. So that's one insight into Lo Hamant and Bilag Disheni. You performed an old miracle. Yeah, we know that miracle already. Old miracle is not impressive to people. They don't say Shira regarding old miracles. That's why they didn't say Shira regarding the well of Miriam when she was alive. In my book of stories, which has been published, and we're going to have a launch here June 30th. You'll forgive me for the commercial. So I have there one story that to me was very illustrative of this idea. So there was when I was the head of the OU Kashrus, there was a company in New York, a food company, and the food inspector for the city of New York discovered rodent hairs in the basement of that food company, meaning that there were rats there. Now, in New York, there are more rats than people. Sometimes hard to tell the difference, but there are more rats than people. So if you look in the basement anywhere in New York, you'll probably find rodent hairs. Nevertheless, this food inspector had it out for this company for whatever reason. And he wrote out a very negative report. And the New York Times got hold of the report. And it was one of the leading stories of the Times that at this kosher food establishment that was well known, rodent hairs were found in the basement. Now, so when that happened, it was under OU supervision. So to speak, the rodent hairs were my fault. Because how could it be that our Mashgiach didn't know that there were rodent hairs in the basement? So we won't go into this at length, but what happened was that the committee of rabbis came to inspect the plant to make certain that the problem would be alleviated. Okay, you march through a food plant and you don't know what you're looking at, you cannot figure out anything. It's pipes and noise and all sorts of things. But the rabbis are marching through, and I hung back. I knew all about the plant, and I knew that the problem of rodent hairs is not easily solved in New York City. But okay. I walked by, there was a 55-gallon drum of pecans on the floor of the plant. And I picked up the lid, and there were like 1 million fruit flies flying around. So I put the lid back down, and I called over to Mashgiach, and I said, Mazeh, what do we do about this? And he looked at me and he said, Rabbi Wein, he said, those are the regular flies. Every 55-gallon drum of pecans in the plant has fruit flies. So it's not a deal. Rodent hairs, that's a chiddush. That's something new. So an old miracle is not a miracle. And therefore people wouldn't take it that way. So here we have two instances where we simply don't understand anything. The mitzvah, the Torah Aduma, is beyond our intellectual capacity. Even those that wish to give reasons and explanations for mitzvot, when it comes to the Torah Aduma, are stymied. So the only thing that we can do is what the Gemara says, Chok chokakti, it's a rule that I made, mitzvot tzivesi, I told you to do it, just do it. Now blows, just blow the shofar. And we have the incident of Moshe Rabbeinu, which is also beyond our understanding. And why such a punishment should be brought upon him, and what the ramifications of it were. It's also beyond our understanding, not given to us. So the Gemara says at the end, Bo Chavakuk ve'amidon alachas. The Navi Chavakuk came and he put the whole Torah on one point. Tzadik be'emunoso yichya. The righteous have to live by faith, meaning that we will not explain everything. The Rambam said, Laman das. You have to understand everything. And if you can't understand the Torah Aduma, so good, but everything else will understand. And therefore he had an alternate pasuk. The Gemara brings another pasuk there. A pasuk having to do with knowledge and understanding. But the Gemara apparently thinks Tzadik b'emunoso yichya, that we live only by faith. Well, if we live by faith, so The Kotzker famously said that a Jew that has faith, for a Jew who has no faith, let's start again. For a Jew who has faith, there are no questions. And for a Jew who does not have faith, there are no answers. And that pretty much sums it up. And therefore we see in life, and in Jewish life especially, so many mysterious things that are beyond our ability to deal with. And nevertheless, that's the type of world that we live in. And therefore we should attempt to follow the idea of tzaddik b'emunaso yichya. I cannot say that people don't have the right to question. They certainly do. But they certainly have to have in mind that there are questions for which there are no easy answers. And that should not in any way weaken our faith or change our direction or mission in life. So have a great Shabbat, everyone, and thank you. This Shabbat we have a Suda Shlishit in Shul. You're all invited. We have an outstanding menu. If you missed tuna fish for a year and a half, come. So just did.
Yeah, I just did. That's what I can do.
Okay, good.